what's a big Michigan thing that people get wrong about your state?
Oh, people underestimate our sports teams all the time. All the time. We are a gritty people, and we are resilient, persevere. We believe in perseverance. We never give up.
Right.
We stay true to ourselves, and even if people doubt us, we will rise again as our sports teams show the nation every season.
Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened.
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
Good night and good luck.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Lincoln Project podcast. I am your host, as always, Rick Wilson. We are delighted you're joining us today. We have an absolutely terrific interview today, and that's Jocelyn Benson. Now, you've probably heard of Jocelyn Benson as Michigan's crusading Secretary of State, who was on the front lines fighting back against Trump's attempt to steal the 2020 election. He's not a fan. We often have people come on the program who are running for a higher office, and in her case, she is running for governor for 2026. We also have a lot of people on the program who come on to talk about their books. She's also written a terrific new book called The Purposeful Warrior, Standing Up for What's Right When the Stakes Are High. And Jocelyn, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and for writing a book that is very much along a lot of the lines that I try to govern my life by and try to live my life by, which is to be brave, to have courage, and to not let seemingly overwhelming odds get you into the personal or political or philosophical ditch. So you have done a terrific job as Secretary of State. I want to start out where you did face up against power, you did face up against threats, you did face up against people who think that violence and death threats are perfectly acceptable parts of our political dialogue in 2020. Talk to us about how, in your role as Secretary of State, during the 2020 election cycle, talk to us about what Trump tried to do and why it was so important that you fought as hard as you did.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and
always good to see you.
Big fan of the podcast, so appreciate you having me on. It was very surreal, in the midst of this election cycle, the pandemic, the highest turnout election in our state's history. An enormous amount of collaboration and partnerships came together to ensure voters would have what they need to feel safe and secure in the midst of this election. And then yet, after the election, even though we counted our ballots transparently and securely faster than we had anticipated and all the rest, instead of celebrating, we had to stand up and defend those results against someone nationally coordinated effort to overturn those election results simply because the president didn't like them. And so it was very surreal to, whether you agree with the president's philosophy or not, whether it's Reagan or Bush or Clinton or Obama, I think, there's always an amount of just kind of like awe around the president's honor. And for that to be really stripped by this sort of flagrant abuse of office and this really coordinated effort was jarring. And there were just moments where he couldn't believe that this was happening. And we realized as we went throughout that there was no bottom to which people would stop stooping to overturn the results of a free and fair and accurate election, and how antithetical that is to who we're supposed to be in this democracy.
Well, you came through that. Trump did not get what he wanted.
He prevailed. Yeah, the will of the people ruled the day.
Right, amazingly. And as Secretary of State, you are now positioning yourself and beginning your campaign for governor. And I want to ask the obvious set of questions that you're going to get asked 5,472,000 times. Why are you running, and what will you do?
Well, I think for me, Michigan isn't just where I work, it's where I live. It's where I started my family, and it's where I have worked every day to make life better for people in every corner of our state. I've spent my entire career fighting for accountability and protecting our freedoms and saving people time and money, making government work well. It's been a centerpiece of my job as Secretary of State, delivering those results. So I think in this moment, what we need are government leaders who will speak the truth, who will get things done, and who will be uncompromising in our values and in fighting to make sure we're driving down the cost of living and increasing access to wages and a prosperous economy in our state. But the other thing I'll just add for me in terms of my why in this moment is that I'm a mom to an 8-year-old kid who in 10 years is going to be 18 and he's going to be deciding what he wants to do for his future. And I want Michigan to be a state, not just where he chooses to stay and build a family, but where every kid can have access to quality education, access to healthcare, well-paying jobs, and a healthy, thriving lifestyle. I think we all want our loved ones to be happy, healthy, safe, and nearby. And as governor, I want to make sure that I'm waking up every day, making that real for every resident in our state.
That is something Michigan has faced, is sort of an e-migration, people leaving Michigan to go to Florida and Arizona and Texas and other places. Do you look at that? And you said family, people keeping people closer, and I really think that is something that makes a society and a state and municipalities more cohesive when there are ties and bonds between people that aren't just, hey, I moved to Nashville because it was fun, or I moved to Atlanta because it was fun. Is that something you think that Michigan can turn around in this moment we're in, because we're about to face a really tough economic shock for the state of Michigan?
Yeah, I think good public policy and leadership can turn that around, can keep our most talented, all of our residents here in Michigan, and can keep that talent here instead of going to other places. But we do it by really investing in our people and an economic policy that creates places where people want to live, transit to make it easy to get around the state, quality schools where people want to send their kids, and public education, and really encourage investment in industries across the board, not just one. So whether that's climate tech or biotech or arts and filmmaking, I want to diversify our industries in our state as well, so that no matter what you choose to do with your life, you can do it here in Michigan.
I had a focus group interview with a guy one time years and years ago, back in 2015, who we were trying to interview people about Trump. And he said, my dad worked in a wire harness factory. He could afford to send me and my sisters to college. We had a little house up on the lake. My grandfather sent my dad and his brother and sister to college, and they had a little house up on the lake. He goes, and now I'm working in a call center in Orlando, Florida. And it's just the pain of that moment for this guy, where that thing he thought was going to be there for his family, that his parents provided, his grandparents provided. It strikes me that is, that would be not a political gift, but something that it would pay for the state. Because I love me some Michigan, and I love Michiganders because they are so quintessentially American in so many ways. And it does strike me that the auto industry and a lot of the industries around the auto industry are right now being put under the gun.
Yeah.
So if you are elected governor in 2026, I regret to inform you are still going to have 2 more years of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And how do you see Michigan pushing back on the things that are going to kill Michigan jobs, these tariffs to start with, but also dismantling the Department of Education and all these other things that you're going to face for at least 2 years of his term?
I think we got to stay focused on the North Star, which is, are we making people's lives better in this state? And I'll continue to stand up and demand truth and accountability from the guy in the White House. And we'll also continue to work with anyone, anywhere, even, leaders in other countries and leaders in other states, to find ways to protect our people and invest in economic opportunity. And so right now it starts with recognizing that folks across Michigan and people in general are struggling economically, in part because of the chaotic economic policy coming out of Washington, D.C. But at the same time, we need to work with what we can. If we can't get the support of the federal government, perhaps partnering with other governors or other countries to drive down the cost of living, but create more opportunities for folks.
I think one thing I observed is when you were, because I'm an elections nerd, Obvi, I noticed that you had done a lot of stuff as Secretary of State, not only on the election side, but the business side, to simplify process, to make it easier for people to access services. And it's funny because it's the cliche of Democrats, they just want the biggest, most complicated, but you seem to have a direction in what you've done as Secretary of State to sort of shape a government that works for people. Maybe it's smaller, but it's smarter and it's better.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges of this moment. What role should government play in our lives? I believe it should be driving costs down and making our lives easier. And that's what I've done with our Secretary of State office. We've increased efficiencies. We cut wasteful spending. We've made government help you on your way and then get out of your way. And so much of federal government and a lot of the chatter right now is government showing up everywhere you don't need it and nowhere when you do, right? Like it's and so how can we and how can Democrats really shift that and talk about a government that actually works for people by showing up when you need it and not be and getting out of your way? We don't need government in our bedrooms or in our doctor's offices, but we do need government showing up to help us start a business and to help make sure that our driver's license are being processed correctly and efficiently, that unemployment benefits and childcare and other types of care are getting to the people who need it. So there's a role for government to play, and there's a time when for it to get out of the way. And part of what I hope to show as governor is when government can work well for us and when it should be nowhere to be seen.
So as MAGA has infested my former party and become very much a different thing from the old Republican world, as I like to say, they took the branding and the logo and the building, everything else is different. You're going to face one of many, many Republicans. I mean, John James, who I heard has run before, once or twice or three times or however many times he's run. You're going to face any number of these folks in the MAGA space. And you don't have to go tear them apart at the moment, but I'm curious if you're detecting like the natural tension that is there inside the Republican world. Like they know that a lot of what Trump is doing is harmful to Michigan and harmful to the state and harmful to America, but they're not going to say anything publicly. Are you starting to feel some of that tension there? Because I see a lot of Republicans trying to like skate the line.
Yeah, I mean, that tension's been there for a while now. In 2020, it was very clear who won the presidential election, and it was appalling and shocking to me how hard it was for many Republican leaders to speak the truth and just talk about who won. It still is hard, right? And so, for me, I think Michiganders deserve governors who are going to tell them the truth, who are going to make their lives easier, who are going to wake up every day trying to say, how can I improve your life, drive down costs, make life more affordable, ensure you can not just afford to buy a home, but heat it
Right.
and cover the costs.
Helpful
Right?
in the northern tier.
I'm always going to be a leader, a candidate, a governor who just talks about those issues. And that's why I have one statewide. I mean, this is my fourth statewide race. In 2022, I led the ticket by 14 points, or, I won by 14 points, and I included winning counties that no other Democrat had won.
That's right.
So I do believe you can build a cross-partisan coalition of support for policies that are just about making lives easier. And I think any candidate who delves further into, divisive politics and misinformation is not going to find a home here in Michigan. I believe that voters are smart enough to see through that. And because people are struggling right now in our state and need help getting access to childcare and healthcare and quality schools and just to be able to afford a home in the community they want to live in, those challenges are what's real for our residents. We need a governor who will solve those problems, not get tangled up in the sort of chaos and confusion that you're seeing coming out of Washington, D.C.
They do love some chaos. So I want to ask you a little bit more about the book. Talk to me about how you became inspired to write this, and sort of what was the story that you wanted to get out there that you had never told? What was something that you wanted people to read that they would understand you better?
Yeah, well, it started as my take on what it was like to stand up to a president and protect the votes of Michiganders in 2020. And then as I wrote it, it really evolved into a book about the power we all have to stand up to the bullies and stand up for ourselves to define a better world, whether it's for ourselves, for the people we love, for the communities and places we call home, and that we can do that. We can win even in challenging, turbulent times. So there were a lot of stories in the book that I haven't told before. The thing that frankly was both the hardest and most important for me to tell was what it was like to be a military spouse with my husband serving in Afghanistan, and how that really showed me how support for the military is a mile wide and an inch deep. And too many politicians run on saying they're going to support our veterans and then
Right.
don't actually show up for them when we need them. And that really created a very visceral sense for me that we've got to do better for our veterans, for our service members, for folks who are putting their lives on the line and have to rely on food stamps in order to make ends meet.
Right.
So for me, sharing a little bit about how isolating it was to be a military spouse
Sure.
and how I found community in other spouses, but also really how important it is for us to stand up for those folks, became a guiding light for me for the last several decades.
I think that's the kind of thing that people don't. There is a cheap sort of patriotism of, oh, I love the troop, back the blue, I love the troops, and yet I noticed a lot of Republicans were silent when Elon Musk was cutting veteran suicide hotlines. And if your husband deployed to Afghanistan, he knows the stories, and the struggle for our troops to get access to
Yeah,
healthcare, mental health care, and medical health care is astounding to me that we have failed them in such a profound way.
truly. Yeah, consistently, and in a way that is unacceptable. I remember one of my first visits onto the base where my husband was stationed. I sat down with another spouse and she said, okay, here's where you go to pick up your food stamps. And this is where you can go to redeem them. And it was just a given that as a spouse, I wouldn't have enough money. I was the dean of a law school at the time. So
Right.
like I had my own
You
career.
were you were better
But
off
I
than the average case, but
the assumption was that these families, the assumption was that I would also not have the ability to make ends meet, and it was really devastating to me because this is just spouses, this is kids, these people, and I say this in my book. This is the best of who we are. These are the
sure.
people who put their lives on and their families' lives on the line to protect us. And if we can't do the same for them, then shame on us.
I think that's exactly right. You do tell a story in the book about when you served as a dean of the law school,
Yeah.
about sexual harassment, and I think it's something
Mm.
that women across America, across the spectrum, can both relate to and sympathize and empathize with. Um,
Mm.
you were the dean of this law school, and yet it still happened. Talk to us about that a little bit and how you cover that in this book.
Yeah, I think what really stood out to me as I was going through it was I didn't know what to do because I was so, and I was in denial about it for a while. I thought this is what I guess I just have to do in order to make sure I have a budget because as a dean of a law school, from cutting tuition to increasing access to scholarships to supporting our educators, everything rises and falls on our budget. And so I thought, well, it was really, and then I didn't really have anyone else to even talk to about it. I didn't know how to talk about it. And it was through that process that I realized how important it is to talk about it because as the Me Too movement later illuminated, so many women from all walks of life have power, business leaders, women who are students who don't have the same amount of power. Everyone has stories that go untold. And when they're not told, then we feel alone and isolated. And yet,
Sure.
we do tell them, we can find not just solidarity, but a path forward. And so that's, is a struggle. And I struggled as to whether or not to even share that story in this book. But I ultimately, for the story I tell afterwards about another and two other young women who knew what they could do when they heard
Hmm.
my story, it made it all the more important to say,
Sure.
look, no one else has the power to make us feel inferior without our consent. And we have to
That's
be
right.
clear as leaders, no matter what title we may have after our name, that we have to stand up for who we are and determine and decide how we will respond and what we will do in every moment to keep our hopes, our vision for a better world intact, even when there are folks who would try to use their own power, their own authority to intimidate us out of doing what's right.
Sure. I mean, there is a similarity I have found in the last few years of when you see workplace harassment like that. There's also a sort of similarity in the political space now with
Mhm.
the belief that the trolling, the attacking, the personal death threats, the swatting, all those things are part of the portfolio now. They're part
Mm.
of the deck of cards that one political party wants to play pretty frequently. You've
Mm.
had your share of death threats, um, and your predecessor, was the attempted victim of a kidnapping plot by some very unsavory folks. Um, Talk to us about like do you feel like you're taking the appropriate precautions? Are you eyes up on these things? Because it is something that I think as Trump declines the radicalization of his base, I think my theory is that it will increase. So I'm curious about what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I started my career investigating extremist groups around the country at
Hmm.
the age of 20. So I saw very clearly then how hateful rhetoric and threats directly relate to hateful actions and oftentimes cause them. And so for me, it's important to not allow any space for that type of hate in our state. And to, as a leader, when I encounter it, to stand up to it and use it to make me bolder. I tell this story in the book about how scary it can be, certainly, to deal with these threats, but that we have a choice still in moments like that. We can choose to allow the fear to consume us and drive us away from doing what we want to do with our lives, or we can use it to fuel. And if we can use that fear to fuel our strength, then we can learn to see these threats, these challenges, as potential opportunities to build resilience and get stronger. And so for me, that's one of the guiding principles throughout this book, that through various different examples, people showing up outside my home with guns, to being 20 years old at a hotel room in South Carolina when there were, neo-Nazis outside that I was worried were gonna, track me and take my life or something. But even in those challenging moments, we have the power to decide how we're going to respond and who we're going to be. And that's really, for me, being a warrior for purpose is how I've tried to build my life. And again, the series of stories of standing up to the bullies that on social media or outside my home or anywhere in between is all about staying true to who I am. And I think all of us can, if we all chose to do that, imagine what a nation of purposeful warriors could be.
What's something about Michigan that the rest of America gets right or wrong at scale? What's a big Michigan thing that people get wrong about your state?
Oh, people underestimate our sports teams all the time. All the time. The Tigers, I mean, come on, one of the best teams in baseball consistently. The Pistons, everyone counted us out. They're still
Hmm.
counting us. The Lions. So we are a gritty people, and we are resilient, persevere. We believe in perseverance. We never give up.
Right.
We stay true to ourselves, and even if people doubt us, we will rise again as our sports teams show the nation every season.
I think I've done a lot of work in Michigan over the years, and the cliche of Detroit, the hellhole of Detroit, people have just lost. It's amazing to me how little they understand the vibrancy of Detroit, and I mean the arts, the restaurants, the entrepreneurship. It's a striking city now. It is an amazingly uplifted city. And it still has its problems and its weak spots and its terrible things it's got to resolve. But it is one of those places that shocks people who read the cliches when they go there.
Well, Michigan has a lot to offer, from Ann Arbor, which is obviously world-class educational institution, to Grand Rapids, one of the fastest growing cities in the country. One of the biggest challenges for our entire state is making sure our education system, and this holds true for
Right.
Detroit as well. Our education system, our public education system, is one that can actually prepare our kids for the future. And when we think about, and I think about in leading this state, what we need to do for the next 10 years, part of it is keeping our folks safe,
Hmm.
and making sure, no matter where you live in the state, and there are neighborhoods in Detroit where people can say this, where you want to make sure you can have access to quality housing, and then you can heat that home once you buy it. And then secondly, that when you send your kids to school, they can go to a public school where they get quality education and come home safe. Those challenges are still real for all of our residents across our state. And me, it's important, as governor, as I hopeful the next governor of Michigan, to make sure we are delivering for people on those things, the things that really will improve the lives of everyone in the state every day.
I think that is one hell of a campaign platform, and I think you've got a bright future here ahead of you. You will have to get through a Democratic primary, but we'll see how that goes. You have to get through whoever the Republican is. They're going to throw a lot of resources at this one because they really want Michigan.
Yeah, it is the only, I believe, open seat governor's race in a battleground state in 26. Arizona's a reelect.
Right.
I think Nevada's a reelect, I believe. I should
Yeah.
do a little research just to be sure. But at the same time, without a doubt, the winner of the Michigan governor's race in 26 will have an important role to play in the 28th presidential election, and will have an important role to play in standing up to the chaos and confusion that's coming out of Washington.
As I
DC.
said, if you win this thing, you still have 2 years of very heavy lifting with that guy. All right. Well, Jocelyn Benson, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Lincoln Project podcast today. Tell people where they can reach you on social media, how they can reach your campaign, etc.
Oh, you can find me on social media under Jocelyn Benson, or on Facebook, it's Benson from Michigan. My website's jocelynbenson.com. If you want to learn more about my vision for Michigan as the next governor, you can go there and sign up also to support and be involved.
Well, folks, I want to just say a little sidebar here. Jocelyn Benson was so impressive in my mind in 2020 because she never blinked in the face of intense legal and political and personal pressure. And the Republican apparatus saw Michigan as one of their places where they thought they could break the state and they could have the state declare that Trump had won. And she had the distinction of saying no hard, loud, and constantly to these people and fighting them back in court and on the procedures, because Michigan actually runs pretty good elections. There was no voter fraud. There was none of this, fantasy they have. So, Jocelyn, you are terrific. I can't wait to have you back on the podcast again soon. Keep us informed how your race is going, and best of luck on the book, because as I said, folks, it sort of reflects a set of values that I try to live by, of courage, and being true to the fight that you're in at that moment. It's Purposeful Warrior, standing up for what's right when the stakes are high. That comes out in May. You can get it on Amazon and everywhere fine books are sold. So, Jocelyn, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me, Rick. Take care.